This is my first full day of this multiple whip experiment that I am conducting. So this past Saturday, I had a swatch party. I knit 3 swatches. Today is the real start of the experiment. I think in practice, most people don't cast on 3 sweaters in the same day. Perhaps I could have staggered the cast-ons to make this feel less overwhelming because yesterday was a lot. I don't know about you guys, but casting on a new project can be kind of daunting. And I was definitely feeling that yesterday. Getting the pattern, setting it up, highlighting your sizes, deciding which size you're going to make, highlighting all your numbers for the size that you've chosen. I use the row counter app, so I like to set my patterns up in the row counter app and add the counters, set up the different segments for the number of rows. I didn't go all out for each of these projects, but normally I do spend like 30 minutes to an hour just setting up my pattern in the row counter app. And it makes the rest of the knitting process an absolute breeze. But there is that upfront work required to make that a possibility. And so I cut a few corners with the pattern set up, and I figured once I get to each new section, I'll set it up properly in the row counter so that I can still use the row counter the way I normally like to. But yeah, casting on 3 sweaters in the same day, I don't think I'll ever do that again. Now, will I have 3 sweaters going at one time in the future? Who's to say? That is still undetermined, but starting them all on the same day, absolutely not. Did not enjoy that. The first project I started is the Gemma pullover by Julie Hoover. I have not much at all to show in terms of progress. We've got a section of 2x2 rib here that will be the cuff of one of the sleeves. The pattern instructs to start with one of the body panels, but I wanted to make these cast-ons as low commitment, low stakes as possible. So for a seamed sweater like this, where I'm casting on all of the pieces separately and then seaming them together later, I started with the lowest stitch count. And I actually had to commandeer my needles. These are 2.25 millimeter needles. I had to commandeer these from a languishing sock project that, because I've had to go down considerably in the needle size, not considerably, I think the pattern, basically I had to go down a needle size, and the needle size for my ribbing, I don't have that in my interchangeable set. My interchangeable set only goes down to 2.75 millimeters. So I had to use some sock needles to make this work. Here is what the swatch looks like. So it is a subtle rib and cable texture. I've wanted to make this pattern for a long time. Last year, Julie Hoover moved her business from the United States to Spain. And before that move, she did a promotion for free shipping on all of the kits ordered on her website. And so because I've been eyeing this for so long and I knew I wanted to get it eventually, I figured that time made the most sense because I don't know what the ordering process or the cost would look like ordering this from Spain. So I took the plunge and I ordered this kit, and it has been sitting in my stash for over a year. And then the second project I cast on was the Petite Knit Hannah Sweater V-neck. And I swatch with this yarn. This is Crazy Valley Farm Yarns DK. It's a small batch farm yarn that I purchased at the Illinois Fiber Festival earlier this year. And it's undyed, beautiful. I love a farm yarn. I knit 2 swatches with this yarn yesterday. I knit the first swatch on a 4 millimeter needle. When I was swatching, I was trying to get gauge for a specific pattern, which is the Rainy Day Sweater by Olena Tarenko. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but I think she's a Ukrainian-based designer, and she has a bunch of wonderful patterns, and I've wanted to make a lot of her patterns for quite some time now. So that pattern calls for DK weight yarn, so I was pretty committed to making that pattern with this yarn. However, the first swatch, which was comfortable to knit, and I love the fabric it created, gave me only an 18 stitch gauge, and this pattern calls for a 20 stitch gauge, which is what prompted me to knit the second swatch in a smaller needle, in the 3.5 millimeter needle. The good news is the 3.5 millimeter needle gave me the gauge I wanted, I needed for this pattern. But the bad news is I did not like the fabric as much. It is definitely not drapey. If I hold them up next to each other, maybe you're not seeing the difference in drape visually, but I definitely feel it and I see it in real life. And I just wasn't interested in knitting a DK weight sweater on a 3.5 millimeter needle just to get that gauge and end up with something that did not drape and feel the most comfortable to wear. So I've put this sweater plan on the back burner, and sometime in the future, I hope to come across a DK weight yarn that fits that gauge a lot better. But in the meantime, I had to go back to the drawing board to figure out, okay, what sweater am I gonna make if I'm not going with my original plan? And that's the trouble with farm yarn or working with yarns that you're not as familiar with, or yarn or substituting yarns for a particular pattern. You never really know if the yarn you have is going to fit the gauge that you need to get. And so it's always a little bit of a roll of the dice if it's going to work out. And in this particular case, it didn't. But I did not let that get me down. I spent an absurd amount of time on Ravelry figuring out what would make more sense for this yarn. And I settled on the Hannah sweater by Petite Knit. So that is what I cast on yesterday with the 4 millimeter needles. And as is the case for all of these projects, there is not much progress to show, but I have been getting a good start on these shoulder increases. And outside of the increases right now, I'm just back and forth stockinette. And I am kind of thinking that this is the project I'm going to spend my knitting time on tonight, but that could change. One thing I am curious about with this pattern is Petite Knit seems to have achieved a very neat sewn bind off on 2x2 rib. And what I've been doing has been doing the cable row to reorient the stitches to 1x1 and then doing the sewn bind off. And I'm curious to know if she does something different that has the neater result than what I'm used to getting. So if I can get a better technique for a sewn bind off on 2x2 rib, this will 1000% be worth purchasing this pattern. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out. And I also should add that this project is the only one that I have a loose deadline on. I'm going to the Wisconsin Fiber Festival in early September, and the vendor, the farmer I purchased this yarn for, is also going to be vending at that festival. And so I thought it would be fun 6 months after seeing him at the first festival to show up with a sweater using their yarn and possibly buy more. We'll see. But the other two projects are, I finish them when I finish them. Okay, and the third project I cast on yesterday is the Olsen sweater. The Olsen sweater by Julie Hoover. I realize in this precise moment that I'm knitting two sweaters from the same designer, but I mean, I like her stuff. What can I say? So the third and final project I cast on yesterday is the Olsen sweater, Olsen cardigan by Julie Hoover. This is another one that is knit in panels and seamed together, which I think is pretty typical for Julie Hoover specifically. And I don't mind it. I don't mind a seam sweater. In some cases, I actually prefer it. And this is an all over stockinette dolman sleeve. So it has the increases under the arms and it creates like a curved shape under the arms, not quite a drop shoulder. I have cast on the back panel per the knitting instructions. Now, this is yarn that might look familiar to some of you observant people out there. This is the Brooklyn Tweed MBU worsted yarn that I originally planned to use in my Moonset polo that was my birthday cast on earlier this year. And if you followed that saga, you know it ended in tragedy. I ended up frogging it. It was absolutely not going to work for the gauge I needed to get for that pattern. And I ended up purchasing a different yarn to make it. I finished it. That sweater is great. But this has been sitting in my stash since then. And my original plan was to destash it online, but I'm not really online these days. And the one place I did post it, I wasn't getting any traction. Nobody seemed to be interested. So I decided that I would just knit with it and make something cozy, because despite this color not being my favorite, I love the fabric that this yarn creates. And so I know I'll love wearing whatever it is I end up making with this. I just had to find the right pattern to do so. So the Olsen pattern has an 18 stitch gauge. And my final gauge for this, when it's all said and done, is like 18.5 to 19. So I'm a little bit off gauge, but this is designed to be a very roomy, oversized sweater. So that gives me a little bit of wiggle room and I'm not too worried about this not fitting properly. So yeah, that's the plan here. I did not swatch for this because I know my gauge with this yarn, and I did a filtered search through my favorites on Ravelry to find patterns that I already know I like that happen to have the gauge I'm getting with this yarn. So this was a happy coincidence because this is another pattern that I've wanted to make for a really long time. So I am looking forward to having this in my wardrobe. I'll probably do some modifications to add a pocket, possibly, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. That is a ways down the line. For now, I'm very excited to be working on it and finding a purpose for this yarn in my stash, because once I finish these 3 sweaters, I will have worked through all of my sweater quantities. I'll probably acquire more sweater quantities through the course of working on these, but it feels good to just make moves towards using up the lion's share of my stash outside of partial skeins left over from other projects. So yeah, I'm already feeling really accomplished, and I've barely made any progress on any of these projects, but I am looking forward to seeing how this progresses. Other thing I wanted to briefly share is I was thinking of a way to keep track of how much time I'm spending on each of these projects. Because I'm working on so many different projects and I'm allowing myself to just reach for the project that feels right in the moment whenever I have time to sit down and knit, I am curious to see how I'll end up spending my time over the course of the next few weeks while all 3 of these projects are going, purely out of curiosity, because I wonder if I'll spend most of my knitting time on one project and like leave the others on the wayside, or will I evenly split my time day to day, pick up one project one day, another project the next, or I don't know. I just really don't know how things are going to shake out in my day-to-day knitting practice. And I'm trying not to put myself on any strict rules. Like on Mondays, I work on the Gemma, and on Tuesdays, I work on etc. I don't want to do that, because part of my motivation to do this experiment is to see what happens when I just let myself work on whatever feels right in the moment. And so I'm curious to see how much time I'm going to put toward each of these projects on a day-to-day basis. So I downloaded an app on my phone called Simple Time Tracker. And you can, I'm sure it was developed for like people who do freelance work or any type of billable thing where they have to track what they're working on. But it seems to be the perfect app for me tracking working on multiple projects. So I've set up a timer for my Gemma, the Hannah sweater, and the Olsen cardigan. And I have them here. And I've color coded them and everything. I had a nerdy good time setting this up. And basically, now that they're set up, I just have to click one icon, click on the icon whenever I start knitting, and then stop the timer after my knitting session is over. And over time, it's going to keep a tally of how long I spend working on each of the projects. So I think it'll be really interesting to reflect on a weekly basis on how I do end up splitting my knitting time, especially since having this many projects going at one time is definitely out of the norm for me. The data nerd in me just really wants to know what the breakout is. Happy Saturday. I have spent this morning doing all of the things, not all of the things, but a lot of the things that I needed to do. I worked out and I got some work done. I went to the coffee shop to get some work done. And after a morning of obligations and responsibilities, I have an afternoon of pure indulgence. I'm really excited because I'm on the cusp of a milestone with all three of the sweaters I cast on last weekend. And I want to give a quick update to show you where I'm at with those projects. From June 22nd through now, which is the afternoon of June 27th, I have spent a total of 9 hours and 17 minutes knitting. And the project I spent the least amount of time on is my Olsen cardigan. And so the Olsen sweater is knit bottom up and seamed, and it is a dolman sleeve sweater. So it has sort of batwing shaping between the sweater hem and the cuffs. And there's kind of a curved continuous line of fabric between those 2 points. There's not really a defined sleeve versus body separation. And I think it's going to be really comfortable to wear and interesting to knit. And so I am enjoying this project despite the color of this yarn is still not my favorite, but I can't say that I hate it. Just going back, I probably wouldn't pick this yarn. But anyway, here's the progress. I have spent 2 hours and 4 minutes knitting on this outside of casting it on last weekend. And I have completed the hem on the back panel. And this morning I did a little bit of knitting and I finished all of the short rows. So there's short row shaping at the back hem. I don't know about the front. I have not read ahead in the pattern, but you do short rows at the back to give kind of a subtle curved scoop shaping at the back. And I don't know anything about shaping and why things happen the way they happen, but that is this pattern. So I finished the short rows, and at this point I have only 12 rows to knit before I can start the dolman shaping, which is the gradual increases as I knit up the back panel. So this is what 2 hours and 4 minutes of work looks like here. So with the Olsen, I would say the reason I spent relatively little time on it, and most of the 2 hours I did put into the Olsen, I did it yesterday. So Friday evening after work is where most of that time, I would say 2 of the 2 hours and 24 minutes I put into this project was Saturday evening. I just was kind of picking it up in the mornings if I had a few minutes to spare before I had to leave for work or before I had to start work, then I would put a few rows into this. but it kind of just lived on my dining room table, and I didn't really dedicate any other evening throughout the week to work on this. And so when I looked up on Friday morning, I realized I'd only spent like a cumulative 20 minutes or something on this, and I felt bad for neglecting it. So this was the project I locked in on yesterday to try to even things out a little bit. Okay, so next up is my Gemma pullover. I spent 2 hours and 24 minutes on this project, and I don't know if I want to laugh or cry when I look at what 2.5 hours of work looks like, but this is all I have to show for those 2 hours and 24 minutes. And I mean, not surprised at all, because this is obviously a much smaller gauge than the other two projects I'm working on. And I am knitting the cuff of one of the sleeves to start. Did not start with the body because I thought that would be a bigger commitment than I could mentally stomach. And I was correct, because even this is just, it's making me really sad. But I mean, I'm enjoying it. So far it's just 2x2 rib. It starts just the way my Olsen cardigan has, with the 2x2 rib. And then that's pretty much the only thing that those two projects have in common. So I am to knit the cuff until 3 inches. I have either 2 or 4 more rows to knit before I can finish the cuff. And that is the milestone that I am going to try to reach today, which is finishing the cuff and setting up for the cable pattern. So that is the Gemma. Excited to hit that milestone today. And last but not least is the project I've spent the most time on. And if you've used your deductive reasoning, then you will know that is the Hannah V-neck sweater by Petite Knit. It's your run-of-the-mill top-down drop shoulder. I do like that the other two sweaters I'm working on are seamed. I feel like in general, these 3 sweaters are different enough from each other that I don't feel like I am doing the same thing 3 times at the same time. So I've put 4 hours and 49 minutes into this project. So over half of all of my knitting time this past week has been on the Hannah sweater. And honestly, I love that for me. So I think I might have mentioned earlier that this is the only project that I have somewhat of a deadline on. I'm challenging myself to get this done before I go to the Wisconsin Sheep and Wool Festival in early September. I think on some level that is why I've kind of focused most of my knitting time on this project, but it has also been the most instantly gratifying project so far of the 3 that I'm working on, because with the Olsen, although it's at a similar gauge, much bigger needles, but a similar final gauge. The Olsen sweater started with the 2x2 rib, which is not as smooth and fluid on the needles as stockinette. So I've been reaching for this most nights, clearly as the time shows. And at this point, I am, I think, just 5 rows away from finishing the back yoke. So this is what it looks like. 5 rows from finishing the back yoke, and then I can pick up the shoulder stitches to knit the front sections. And before I know it, I will be in the round on this project. And then I think I will really hit my stride with these 3 whips, because I'll have some stockinette in the round, I'll have some stockinette flat, and I will have some cable and texture to knit. So I think I'm about to get stuck in with some knitting. I have some laundry going, and I have no plans to leave the house for the rest of the day. I've done my outside things, so I'm ready to knit. That's enough yapping from me. I'm gonna pick up these projects, and I think, where should I start? It's been about 2 weeks since my chaotic cast on party the Sunday before last. It's now Sunday, July 5th, and I'm 2 weeks into this multiple active whip lifestyle. So I wanted to close out this video by sharing the total tallies of how much I was able to work on each project, and also just give an update on how far along in those projects I was able to get, and then share some brief reflections on what I think about this multiple whip lifestyle and if I think this is something that I will continue going forward. Starting with the project I put the least amount of time into, it is my Gemma pullover. This is the fingering weight, sunflower color, cabled seamed project. I have put a total of 4 hours and 49 minutes into this project over the past 2 weeks, and this is my progress. And again, I cast on with the sleeve. The pattern instructs to cast on with the body, but the sleeve is a lower commitment, lower stitch count, less overwhelming. So I cast on with the sleeve, and I've been kind of very slowly chipping away at it over the past 2 weeks. This I picked up the least, and I think part of it is I am in no particular rush. I'm not pushing to get this done as soon as possible. This for me is really going to be sort of a spring into summer, and I think subconsciously that has resulted in me putting not as much time into this project as the other two. And I'm not disappointed that I spent such little time on that project, because part of why I cast on 3 projects at one time was so that I gave myself options, and at any given point in time, if I'm ready to knit, I can pick up the project that feels right in that moment. And sometimes that's going to be the Gemma pattern, sometimes it's going to be something else, but I'm not forcing myself to work on any particular project or picking up something because I feel like that's what I should be working on. I'm really just listening to my gut. Okay, so next up, I'll talk about my Olsen cardigan. I put 11 hours and 1 minute into this project over the past 2 weeks. Of course, I'm in the middle of a row because I finished a skein and I decided to put it down instead of joining a new skein. So that's just what we're dealing with. But the stitches are really bunched on the needles anyway, so nothing I show you is going to look like much, but here it is. I have quite a bit of progress. For 11 hours and 1 minute, I am not mad at this progress, and I'm very, very excited about this project. I'm kind of glad I was not able to successfully destash this yarn, because had I done that, I wouldn't be working on this project right now, and I would not have the experience of using this yarn again, because I really, really am enjoying it. Even though the color is still not my absolute favorite, I know that the sweater I'm making with this yarn is going to be worn no matter what. Color is not really a factor because this is not a fashion statement piece for me. This is going to be a cozy house cardigan, but I am still enjoying this. It's been some great stockinette flat, turn my brain off knitting. As I'm working up the back panel, I'm doing gradual increases that create this kind of curved edge under the arm, and it's just been interesting to see how this shaping is achieved. I'm having a lot of fun with this project for that reason. I will say it's getting a little bit daunting at this point because I think I have 216 stitches on the needles right now, and that is going to go up even further to 224 stitches before I'm able to move on to the next part. And for this to only be the back panel, that's a lot of stitches. And I really locked in on this project over the past 3 days. This is the July 4th weekend, so I've had a long weekend, and most of my knitting time the past 3 days has been on this project. So I would say more than half of the progress I'm showing was achieved in the last 3 days, because I totally locked in. I ignored the other 2 projects and I just poured all of my knitting time into this. And yesterday I had a bit of a snafu because I realized I missed one of the increase repeats and I had to rip back a few rows. So that wasn't my favorite experience, but considering that's the first hiccup I've had for all three of these projects, I'm not too mad about that. I'll probably focus on this again at some point and get a good chunk of knitting on it. This feels like something I'll kind of work on in spurts because it's on 6mm needles, and the progress, although it's a lot of fabric and a lot of stitches, the progress works up really quickly. So it's kind of an instant gratification knit in that way. And so if I'm feeling like I need to get a lot of volume out of my knitting sessions, I'll probably reach for this project. And last but not least is my Hannah sweater V-neck by Petite Knit. I have put a total of 14 hours and 26 minutes into this project over the past 2 weeks. And this is the progress I have to show for it. It looks really weird, but I promise that this is working up exactly how I expected it to. So no need to be alarmed at the, puckered anus vibe. I finished the yoke, the body is joined in the round, and once I knit through my second skein of yarn, I went ahead and picked up the stitches for the collar, and I'm probably going to finish this neckline today and then return to knitting the body in the round. I've really appreciated having this project and my Olsen cardigan for some plain stockinette knitting, because I'm able to knit stockinette in the round and flat without looking. These have been perfect companion projects to reading while knitting. Such an elite combination. This is the project I have put the most time into. Like, this is the project that had the most going on in the first part. Like, once I cast on, I'm doing shoulder shaping increases. I'm doing the V-neck increases. I'm working flat and then joining in the round. So there's a lot of different things happening in quick succession. Whereas with the other two sweaters, I'm casting on a crap ton of stitches and I'm doing a bunch of 2x2 ribbing. And then, it's not as exciting at the start, but I think at the end, when I'm able to assemble those sweaters, the excitement will come with my other projects. But with this project, the excitement was kind of concentrated at the front end, as most top-down seamless sweaters are. So I have felt really compelled to pick this up and work on it because I'm kind of pushing for the next milestone. So yeah, I was really motivated to work on this project the most. So that's how much I have been able to accomplish on these three projects over the past 2 weeks. And in total, I have 30 hours and 16 minutes of cumulative knitting across these three projects, which is crazy. That feels like a really good amount of knitting time. I'm proud of myself for carving out as much knitting time as I have. Not that I am trying to meet a quota or I'm trying to be as productive as possible, but more so that I'm spending my leisure time in the ways that I want to, instead of feeling like my free time is stolen by the screens and the phones and the other things that kind of steal our attention throughout the day. Will I continue this multiple whip lifestyle, or will I go back to having one active whip at a time? And the answer is maybe so, maybe no. I am thoroughly enjoying it now. I have really loved having an option of projects to reach for. There have been moments over the past 2 weeks where I'm ready to sit down and knit, but I overthink which project I want to pick up because maybe I'm equally excited about all of them, or, I fall into this thought pattern of I should work on the project that makes the most sense, or the one that I spent the least amount of time with. So I want to even things out. And I thought about systemizing my knitting time to where I would assign specific days to each project so that I can ensure I'm working on them evenly. But then I realized that that would kind of defeat the purpose of this whole experiment, which is allowing myself to just working on whatever I feel like working on when I feel like working on it. So I'm glad I didn't force myself to systemize it in that way. And although I had my moments of analysis paralysis. Eventually I picked a project and I got to work on it. So it didn't hold me back all that much, but I definitely noticed myself getting a little stressed out when it came to deciding which project that I wanted to work on. But now at the tail end of the 2 weeks, it feels a lot more natural than it did when I first started these projects. And I'm vibing. I'm glad that I have multiple projects, and I'm glad that these projects feel intentional. They all kind of bring something a little bit different to my knitting practice. I think at one point decide I wanted to throw in a fourth project into the mix, but I didn't carve out the time to do that. And I do fear that adding another whip into the mix would just be just a bit past my limit. Maybe one day that will feel natural, but right now I'm very content with the 3 projects that I've cast on, and I do have a background project that I have not been working on. But overall, I'm really glad I decided to do this experiment, and I do think that I will continue with this project load in the future. And when I cast off one of these projects, I will consider starting a new one to kind of fill the void, or not. But I'm much more amenable to the idea of having multiple active projects than I was in the past. And I'm really glad I challenged myself to do this experiment to just see how having multiple active projects will fit into my lifestyle. Yeah, I'm excited to keep going on these projects and keep juggling them and knitting on what feels right in the moment. I will be continuing to track the time I put into each of these projects. So I'm really curious at the end how much time in total it will take me to finish each of these. And maybe I'll circle back in a couple of months to give an update on how this multiple whip lifestyle is going, but I'm really into it. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.